So you can see the economy is still in good state when you compare that with the global GDP growth rate. Kenya is benefiting from the tailwinds of the East and Central Africa region being the fastest growing region, but it's not creating enough opportunities to match the students graduating from the universities. And that's why we feel the private sector could provide the impactors that will be required. There is need maybe to continue to improve the investment environment. There's an opportunity to look at incentives to the private sector for investment, and there is a room for focusing on consistency of policies.
Which leads me to Congo. There's obviously been a push to invest in Congo. We're seeing the U.S. Making an increased push to invest in DR Congo. Equity Group has quite a big presence there. When you talk about a consistency in policy, we're seeing some people express concern about policies in Congo as far as it pertains to Initiative 18. How do you feel about the policies, at least in Congo? Are they enough? Are they enabling enough to get investment, more investment into the country?
Of course, any policy environment could always be improved. But we entered DRC in 2015 when we bought a German bank, ProCredit. 2020, we doubled up by buying the oldest bank in DRC, BCDC, merged the two to create Equity BCDC. We now have 27% of the total market share. Our experience is that DRC has consistently been improving. We went to DRC when there were no capital markets, there was no treasury trading, but all these has been put. Innovation was low. We now have seen all the innovations that are in East Africa have now been approved in DRC. So you can see significant consistent improvement. But DRC is coming from a very low level in terms of policy framework. So the improvement has not put it at par with the rest of the East African community countries. But I trust that the decision by DRC to join the East African community will act as a catalyst and give impetus to the reforms, because they need to be harmonized with those of the East African community.
Is it realistic to ask a bank like Equity Group to have different shareholders, or could that again lead other banks like Equity Group and others to move outside of a country like DRC and to not be harmonized, as you say, with the rest of the East African community?
Yeah, there was a policy proposal to diversify shareholding. But I think the way it was designed, it had slight challenges. We highlighted that. We did a memorandum to Parliament, and I'm glad that Parliament has now proposed the changes and passed the changes, and they're now headed to the Senate for the final approval. So, but that was just an exemption that is in that law in every country where listed companies that are publicly owned are exempted for further diversification, because a group like Equity has 80,000 shareholders. So if you, 30,000 shareholders. So when you get the group to give 45% of the shareholding to 3 people, then you have got it all wrong. But that was a misnomer that is in the process of being corrected.
Which finally leads me to Equity Group potentially moving into the UAE, potentially a partner of the willing, as you say. Does this look like in the future this will continue to hopefully help the group grow and achieve some of those ambitions that you're setting out for?
No, we have seen the great example that has been set by Asia generally and Middle East over the last 30 years. The transition that has occurred in China, the transition that is occurring in India. And we felt that a strong linkage between Africa and Asia and the Middle East would serve the continent in terms of market. Those economies have created the pools of capital. They build skills and entrepreneurship capabilities. And Africa, given the proximity to UAE, would benefit substantially if you could anchor trade there. We have also seen there become centers of trade in one way or another. So that helps Africa to diversify its markets from purely the traditional markets that were built at the old economic framework of trade and the World Trade Organization formulations.
Do we have a timeline for when that office is planning to open?
I'm so excited that it has been approved by the shareholders, and now we are going through the final phases of regulatory approvals. We needed the shareholders' approval before we could get regulatory approval, but they have been, our applications have been received positively both in Kenya and UAE, and we are optimistic that we should be able to open the office in the fourth quarter.